Ms. Melvet Hill. I'm the Executive Director for the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity, and I'm honored to moderate today's discussion on bridging the digital divide, AI and communities of color, exploring education, access, and cultural equity. And so the moment that we're in, we are standing at an unprecedented moment in technological history. Artificial intelligence isn't just changing how we work, learn, or solve problems, it's fundamentally reshaping who gets access to opportunity in our society. One might reflect and say that everyone and every precious and previous technological revolution has initially widened inequality before policy and intentional action work to close those gaps, right? And so technology has happened, and then we have to work to close the gaps. But we cannot afford to repeat that pattern with AI. And there has been a historical pattern of technology and inequality. And here's what we know from history. We know that when technology happens, there are inequalities that are widened, right? And these gaps continue to widen and quite frankly, cause issues in our country. So when we look at things like the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, initially it created stark divisions between factory workers who control the new machinery and workers who face dangerous conditions and low wages. And it took decades of labor organizing and policy intervention and educational reform to create pathways for broader economic mobility. And we can also talk about the introduction of personal computers, or back in the day, we called them PCs, in the 1980s and the 1990s, followed by a similar pattern. Early adopters, predominantly white, affluent families, gained significant advantages in digital literacy and career preparation. A 1997 study by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration found that white households were nearly 3 times more likely to own computers than Black households, and 5 times more likely than Hispanic households. This digital divide persisted until targeted investments in public computer labs, school technology programs, and broadband infrastructure began to close these gaps in the early 2000s. And most recently, we've seen this with internet access itself. The COVID-19 pandemic starkly revealed that while some students could seamlessly transition to online learning, millions of students, disproportionately students of color from low-income families, lacked reliable broadband or devices. And we also saw that happen in rural environments as well. According to the Federal Communications Commission, as of 2021, 21% of Black households and 23% of Hispanic households lacked broadband access, compared to 13% of white households. The pattern is clear. Without proactive intervention, technological advances initially benefit those who already have advantages, so access to capital, education, and social networks. The question for us today is whether we'll let AI follow the same trajectory or whether we'll learn from history and build equity into AI education from the start. And so why does this conversation matter now? Today's discussion isn't just academic. It's urgent and it's practical. Right now, while AI systems are being developed and educational frameworks are still being written, we have a unique window of opportunity to get this right from the start. We can build AI education that is culturally responsive, community-centered, and designed to create pathways to economic mobility rather than barriers to success. But getting this right requires us to center the voices and experiences of communities of color from the very beginning, not as an afterthought. It requires us to understand that digital equity isn't just about getting devices into hands. It's about creating educational experiences that honor students' identities, cultures, and ways of knowing while preparing them to be leaders in an AI-driven economy. And so here in Connecticut, we have both significant challenges and remarkable assets. Our achievement gaps in traditional education continue to persist. And these gaps seem to be a big risk, right? And they are going to be amplified in AI education if we're not intentional about our approach. At the same time, Connecticut is home to incredible community organizations, innovative educators and policy leaders, and also those who are leading in philanthropy. And all these people understand that equity isn't just a moral imperative, it's an economic necessity. So we cannot build a thriving AI economy without drawing on the talents and perspectives and innovations of all our communities. When we exclude communities of color from AI development, we don't just harm those communities, we impoverish the entire field. The most powerful AI solutions will come from diverse teams solving real-world problems in partnership with the communities that we serve and that they serve. So what do we need to address? Today, we need to grapple with several critical questions. How do we ensure that AI education reaches beyond coding boot camps and computer science classrooms to become integrated across all subjects in ways that are culturally responsive? And how do we support educators, many of whom don't yet feel confident with AI themselves, in creating inclusive learning environments? And how do we address the reality that many students of color have never seen someone who looks like them working in AI, making it difficult to envision themselves in these careers? And perhaps most importantly, how do we shift from a charity model where we're trying to help communities access AI to a partnership model where communities are leading the design of AI education that serves their needs and values? And so what does the path forward look like? Well, you'll hear from panelists today who represent different sectors, but there are these interconnected pieces of the puzzle. We have community advocates who understand the lived realities of students and families navigating educational systems. We have those who are doing research and policy work. We have Dr. Berry, who is well known on many different topics and across many different sectors, but particularly in healthcare, she'll be talking today. And most importantly, we're here to move beyond just identifying problems to creating solutions and co-creating them together with you. And we want to leave this conversation with some concrete strategies and ideas and concepts that educators and policymakers and families and community members can implement, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in agencies, things that policymakers can advance in their legislation, and things that community organizations can use to advocate for their students and families. And so imagine for a moment what success would look like. If you close your eyes with me, picture classrooms where students of color aren't just learning to use AI tools, but are designing AI solutions for challenges in their own communities. Envision schools where AI education is integrated into culturally relevant curricula that connects to students' experiences and their aspirations. And now think about communities where families feel empowered to engage with AI education because programs are designed with their input and reflect their values. Success means seeing young people of color not just as consumers of AI technology, but as its creators, its critics, and its ethical guides. It means having AI development teams that reflect the diversity of the communities these systems will serve and that they're in and that they will be affecting. And it means policies that proactively address equity rather than trying to retrofit inclusion into systems already designed without community input. And so the stakes are very high for us. But if we get this right, if we center equity from the beginning, we can create something unprecedented, a technological revolution that advances rather than undermines justice. Today's conversation is about more than sharing information. It's about making commitments. We're here to commit to moving beyond well-intentioned statements about the importance of diversity and equity to concrete actions that create measurable change. We're here to commit to listening to communities of color, not just as beneficiaries of AI education, but as partners in designing it. And we're here to commit to accountability, to measuring not just whether students of color are participating in AI education, but whether they're thriving and leading and seeing pathways to careers where they can shape the future of artificial intelligence itself. And so over the next hour, our panelists will share insights from their work on the ground, their research, and their policy expertise. But more importantly, they'll help us envision and plan for a future where AI education and career pipelines serve as a bridge to opportunity for all students and all people, especially those who have been historically excluded from technological innovation. So I encourage you to get ready with your questions. Make sure that you put them in the Q&A, but also we'd love to see your ideas coming through and challenge us when you hear gaps in our thinking and help us leave this conversation with concrete next steps that we can implement in our communities, our schools, and our workplaces. So the future of AI is not predetermined. It's being written right now in conversations like this one, in classrooms across Connecticut, in policy discussions that are happening at the Capitol and in corporate boardrooms. also in technology startups and in community with you. So let's make sure that this future with AI reflects the values of equity and justice and opportunity that we want to see in our society. So thank you again for being here. Now I'm going to ask our exceptional panel of experts and advocates to introduce themselves as we get ready for our conversation. So our introductory question here is, I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and then share one key insight about AI's current impact, whether it's positive or challenging, in the communities of color that you serve and study. Let's first go to Versha.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Versha Munshi-South. I live in Stamford, Connecticut. I'm a former Stamford Public Schools board member, and I'm also a parent of two high school students. That's probably my most important job. I'm a former teacher, school principal, and education consultant. And these days, my focus with schools, districts, and state agencies is really on how do we support students in this age of AI. And how do we really listen to students and learn from their experiences so that we're developing common sense AI policies and guidelines that everyone understands? So one key insight I would say here is that for the first time in my entire time working in education, maybe in the history of this country, we really have the opportunity to level the playing field for students and to address the vast inequities that we've always had in schools based on demographics. We have the opportunity now to really reach every student and provide excellent resources, no matter where you live, what school you go to, and how many resources your district happens to have.
Thank you, Versha. Let's go to Haritha next.
Of course. Hi, my name is Haritha. I go by she, her pronouns, and thank you so much for having me today. I am currently a senior at the University of Connecticut. I'm majoring in political science, music, and women's and reproductive health, and I'm on the Masters of Public Policy 4+1 program. I also currently serve as vice president of the student body. And outside of that, in the community, I am secretary of the Asian Pacific American Coalition. So we actually work quite a bit with the APA affairs part of CWCSEO. Um, I guess my key insight is kind of both a positive thing and a challenge. So I would say like the challenge with AI, especially when it comes to communities of color, is the perpetuation or the potential perpetuation of certain stereotypes and harmful beliefs, and the use of AI to replace things that maybe shouldn't, then that's a conversation, that's a challenge. That's a conversation we need to have. And the immense amount of power that kind of ends up with the people who lead these companies, which are primarily white men. Um, I will say a positive aspect of it, and I think, Melvet, when you were talking about the history of technology, I do think there's one thing that separates AI from some of the past technologies is the fact that it's free. And we often hear the phrase, if something is free, you're often the product. Um, but it also means that AI has a greater capacity to be democratized in terms of access to this technology. And there's a lot of positive things. And we spoke a lot about that in our last panel about, making resources more accessible to people. Megan spoke about language access. Um, AI can also help us focus on more higher level tasks instead of like more mundane work. But again, that comes with that challenge of being careful of what we use AI for.
Thank you, Haritha. I'm going to go to Dr. Linda Berry next.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Berry. I'm a professor of surgery at UConn School of Medicine. I am also the Associate Dean of our Office of Multicultural and Community Affairs and the Associate Director of a Health Disparity Institute. I'm not an engineer, but I use AI because I had no choice. My students were using AI. And I think we'll delve into the nuances of the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I do think that any student, any child should say, I want to grow up and I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a truck driver, whatever. And there's certain aspects in your training that are gatekeeping that are such as taking entrance exams for like medical school or law school. And I actually feel like if we teach students how to use AI responsibly, that could take away a burden and could be a tutor for you. You have to pay for questions to take so that you can be prepared for the actual exam. AI can be your bank of questions. And I think that creates more equity in terms of accessing, say that, oh, because you're a person of color, you can't do well on a standardized test. AI could be your tutor, your coach, teach you how to take. No, we don't even teach students how to take a test, you know? And so I feel like there's a lot of potential there, but there need to be guardrails and boundaries, and we need to give students the tools on how to use it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda. And now, Venicia Cuff.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Venicia Cuff, and I have several years of experience as a nurse, working in assisted living and nursing home facilities over several years. I've since transitioned to now I am an internationally CPT accredited AI consultant, and that's where I spend most of my time. And one thing I will say on a positive note with AI is that AI has given the opportunity to actually level the playing field, if I may use that term, in our personal, executive, and or business aspect of it. Because as an entrepreneur myself, AI has afforded me the opportunity to really simplify difficult challenges within my business, which I could have never done on my own. So, in a positive light, AI has really leveled the playing field, and it creates opportunity in and of itself. I know a lot of people talk about AI will be replacing humans and taking over jobs and all the different aspects of it. Yes, that might be so to some extent. However, if we endeavor to upskill ourselves and learn and understand AI, it will not replace us. It will simply enhance us. And I'm here today to really encourage everyone within the sound of my voice to look at AI as an amplifier, as a tool, and not a replacement of anything that we touch. Linda Barry spoke a while ago about being a tutor. It is such a marvelous tool when used correctly. As a business owner, an excellent tool when used correctly. Mm-hmm. And we will delve into more of that throughout our discussion today.
Yes, thank you so much, Venicia. And finally, Megan Baker.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Megan Baker. I am the lead Asian American Pacific Islander policy analyst for the CWCSEO, and also an adjunct at the University of New Haven, where I teach components of Asian history as it relates to public policy. And so I'll kind of take from Haritha's book. It's a positive and a negative, but we're kind of experiencing a paradoxical effect of AI on the AAPI community across economic sectors, genders, and generations. AAPIs constitute about 7% of the national population, and while we're rapidly growing, this demographic makes up 22% of new PhDs in AI and about 57% of Silicon Valley's workforce. So we're seeing that there's growing emergence of this demographic into this field, but yet Asian Americans and women are the groups that are most vulnerable because they stand to be the most affected by AI in industries that are most threatened by automation. So for decades, Asian Americans have been looked at as this monolith, but they've also concurrently occupied both the top and the bottom of economic ladders. And when I teach about this, I also teach about the historical parallels in the second technical industrial revolution, where we had Chinese labor being used to build the railroad infrastructure for the Transcontinental Railroad. And at the same time, historically, we're seeing the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so we're seeing that they're helping to build the infrastructure of AI. And how is this history being paralleled with AI advancement, but also that lack of inclusion when we're looking at still persistent bias in algorithms, and just bias that's existing in general and how it's being perpetuated. So I'm very excited to be with these esteemed panelists and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. And there's our panel. We're going to get right into the questions because there's a lot to cover today. And we're hoping that you'll stay around for the entire conversation. Please feel free to add your comments in the Q&A. We'll share out some of those later. We do not have the chat open today because we want you really participating by watching and listening. And certainly if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And so I'm going to Linda first. As someone who's dedicated your career to health equity. How do you see the parallels between healthcare disparities and what we're beginning to see with AI access and representation?
So that's a great question. And it's actually pretty scary how much they are in alignment in terms of the way they're moving forward, whether you like it or not. I want to first start with the premise of this session, bridging the divide. We haven't bridged the divide. So despite all our efforts, there's always someone who's left behind. And so in that context, when I think of healthcare, we look at them as individuals in a system, but they're often perceived as consumers. You don't have a choice often when you get sick and you have to use the healthcare system. You have a choice and options depending on how much you have in terms of money and access. That's similar to AI. AI is being monetized and is also about access. If you don't have Wi-Fi, you can have broadband, but you have to pay for Wi-Fi. And even there are different lanes of paying. That's just like there are different types of insurance that gives you different access. And so, yes, it's free because you're in it. But and also, it's not just the use of it, it's the way it's being integrated in so many different aspects of our daily lives, even without us knowing. And similar to the healthcare system, it's about inclusion, right? And so when we get our data sets and when we're looking at how the data is harvested and then utilized and who it benefits, I feel like AI is mirroring that, right? As was mentioned, and I think we'll discuss it later on, who's at the table? I think it's really important. I think of people in the community. They're not often involved in health policy, but they are really important to undergirding the healthcare system. Similarly, it's not just the coders, but it's us who are the users of AI that will also drive the development and how it impacts. And the fact that there are people who are excluded by virtue of not being fluent in AI, being scared of AI, or don't have access to all the tools that are necessary, like a computer and Wi-Fi, means that it will be shortchanged for all of us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berry. And as we, thanks for setting the stage for us. As we shift now and think about education, equity, and AI, Megan, from your policy research perspective, what are the most significant barriers preventing students of color from accessing quality AI education in Connecticut? And I think, importantly, what systemic changes would make the biggest difference? Megan's trying to unmute. There we go.
Thank you for identifying that. Yeah, in my work with the AAPI community, we're already combating, especially in the education space, what I have come to dub as data insecurity. And a lot of AAPI student data points are often relegated to this aggregated other category or experience invisibility off data sets entirely due to either low sample sizes or just problematic existing methodological frameworks that we have as our rules for student data inclusion. And I just use that because the education space is where we've really seen this methodology be problematic. And so I think this perpetuation of invisibility of AAPI and other inclusive data is one of the biggest barriers to not knowing some of these student metrics, and also having that perpetuance of that siloing. So there's a lack of cultural nuance and consequently upholding some of these model minority myths that maybe it's not needed in these spaces. We can't take temperature checks of what's happening. And so there's bigger disparities across API student communities. So when we're failing to recognize the things that we can do to interject into eliminating some of these gaps, we really just see this perpetuated and upheld.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. And so Versha, from the perspective of a parent and Board of Education member, same question. Like, what are the most significant barriers preventing students of color from accessing quality AI education in Connecticut?
Yeah, I mean, so what I'll say, and even beyond Connecticut, and working with schools and districts throughout the country, is that there's a big push to set AI policy, and there are lots of states that have a mandate, I know in Stanford, we went ahead and set an AI policy. But as anyone who's worked in schools or district knows, policy is just the first step. You need the regulations, you need the guidelines, you need that very plain language so that everyone really knows what's allowed. That becomes really important with AI because the stakes are so high when it comes to being accused of cheating. And kids we're finding are absolutely terrified. And I'm sure Haritha at UConn, you're saying something similar of like college students, high school students, middle school students are really scared of being accused of cheating, but they also don't know what cheating is. And so, because there are a lot of ways you could use AI for an assignment. You could use it as Dr. Barry described. You could use it. You could use it to tutor, create flashcards, a study guide. Is that cheating, right? Obviously, having it do your complete assignment, probably most people would say is cheating, right? But there's a lot in between there. And my daughter actually was just accused of cheating on an assignment. And the way that that happened was that the teacher just was feeding the assignments into an AI detector, and it came out that it was, over 90% AI produced, but the teacher didn't even read the assignment, right? She didn't even read what was turned in. And so this, as you can see, becomes an enormous equity issue. And even within that example, when that happened to my own child, me having the privilege of having been a board member, a teacher, school principal, I, of course, spoke to the teacher, the principal, the chief academic officer, the board policy chair, and asked, what is our policy on AI detector tools? And I got several different answers. And so that also unearths this lack of clarity that if they all have different answers, certainly teachers and students are confused. And so that lack of clarity probably is the biggest barrier for students being able to effectively use AI and teachers really knowing where to encourage and where to say, like, no, absolutely, we're not using AI there.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. That's a whole nother, the grading of the papers using AI is definitely we're hearing more and more about that as an issue and also as an equity issue. I want to go to Haritha. Haritha, as a current UConn student who's navigating this landscape right now, what has your experience been like, accessing AI and, and computing science in your education? And then what would you tell policymakers about what students of color actually need to succeed in these fields?
Of course. I wanted to start off by jumping off of Versha's point about some like innovative approaches that I have noticed some of my professors do, because I know some professors like to just write in the syllabus, AI use is not allowed. But I find the most interesting policies are when they take a complex approach to it. I wanted to give a shout out to, and I think this is a great example of what we should be doing in the classroom. I'm going to elaborate that on that as well. But for one of my public policy courses, and this one was specifically focused on statistics, and I'm sure many of us can already see a bunch of different ways that AI can be used to analyze data. Um, do like statistical calculations for you. Some AI models are better suited for math than others, and that's been interesting to also to look at. But for one of our projects, he gave us like I think it was like a hypothesis testing problem, where we had to compare solutions produced by AI versus us doing it ourselves, and the results were fascinating. So it's this stuff is important. I was talking about it with our dean of students, talking about the implications of AI both in the classroom but also in mental health. Um, and this sort of education is for more than just computer science majors. It's for everyone. We all need to be taught about the ethical and sociological impact of AI throughout education, starting from K through 12, but also in higher education. I think we all understand that AI can do great work, like in stats. It's, maybe great for calculations, but you should also understand which models are better for it. How do you evaluate which model to use for a certain calculation? Who's analyzing that data? Should that be a human or should that be AI? Because we understand that a lot of biases can be introduced if you're giving the entire project to AI. So it is important that we know when to use AI, how to use AI, and the potential drawbacks that come from that. Um, I think we also need to make sure that students are still able to do those skills on their own. And I think that's what I appreciate my stats professor for doing. So after we did that, and in the future, we're not teaching kids how to do the statistical calculations on their own, that's a problem. And I think In our last panel, Kara actually brought up a great point about the calculator, right? Once the calculator was introduced, we didn't lose a lot of jobs, but we know how to use a calculator. We know when to use a calculator, and we also know how to still do arithmetic on our own.
Right. Yeah.
So we need to prepare all students, no matter their field, for how to use AI in their field, and our higher education curricula need to represent the shift. This means our college graduates are going to need different skills that they needed 5 years than they needed from 5 years ago. And I think this is how we move to mitigate the impact of, oh, AI is going to take all of our jobs. We need to we need to have different skill sets then.
Right.
So those are the conversations that we need to be having in the moment, and that also spreads this education about AI to everyone, and that especially in fields that are dominated by communities of color. I think it'd be cool at UConn, for example, there's different competencies that we have to fulfill by the time we graduate. We have like a writing and a major component. I think it'd be cool if we had an AI/technology in the major component of that program.
Yeah.
Um, I
Okay.
also wanted to speak about mental health, which is a huge, huge
Well, can
concern.
we come back to that one,
Oh
Haritha,
yeah,
a
of
little
course.
later? Let's get
Yeah.
into the mental health aspects. But I want to share, Haritha, you mentioned Kara Casimiro, or Dr. Casimiro is the superintendent from Danbury Public Schools. She was on our webinar the other day on Monday when we were talking about AI and women in the workplace and entrepreneurs and small business. So I just wanted folks to know, as you mentioned, Kara, they're like, there's no Kara on the screen. We're talking about Dr. Casimiro and the good work that she's doing there in Danbury, Connecticut. I want to go to Versha, sorry. As you know, as we continue to think about this, like we know that personalized learning through AI sounds promising, but we also know about algorithmic bias in educational tools. So how do we harness AI's benefits while protecting students from its potential harms?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I'm also not an engineer, so
Yeah.
there is that whole like technical aspect of that, right? But and think about personalized learning that has the most promise for students, right? And having been a teacher of elementary school where we've got 25 students and they all have different needs, and those needs and that diversity is really growing, over time as we're seeing more students being diagnosed with various, all kinds of individual needs. And so AI really has the potential to support us in personalized learning. But we also could use this as an opportunity to kind of disrupt, like, what are those outcomes that we're personalizing learning towards, right? So a lot of that is outdated. I'm really proud of Connecticut, for example, for emphasizing it and mandating now that all students need to learn financial literacy. My daughter's taking financial literacy right now, probably the most useful class she's ever taken, right? And especially because of how she likes to spend money. But that is the kind of an innovation and really like modernizing our curriculum and our assessments. So the personalizing is part of it, but if we're personalizing pathways leading to outdated outcomes and assessments that we know have various biases in them, then we're kind of doing something wrong. So thinking about this opportunity of like, are students learning what they'll need to be successful for jobs that haven't been created yet, to really lead the way when it comes to all this innovation. So we have these opportunities to personalize, but we also really need to think about like, is what we're focusing on in high school really what we need in 2026? I know that kids are reading the same books that I read when I was younger. Maybe that's fine, maybe that's not fine, but we really have a great chance here to revisit all of that, what our standards are and what we're trying to build towards.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're getting deeper. So I hope folks are taking notes out there and also coming up with your good questions. Thank you so much, Versha and Haritha. Dr. Berry or Linda, you've seen how bias in medical AI affects patient outcomes. What parallels do you see in educational AI and how we can apply lessons from healthcare equity work to education?
I think a lot of the foundation of AI is based on coding and machine learning. And I remember this comment that was said that the biases of the coder is often reflected in the coding. And so, I think AI is pushed to give you an answer. I've never seen it say, I don't know. And I think that's where hallucination comes into play. And I've seen a lot of the hallucination ends up being biased responses. And I think that requires, patients don't necessarily challenge or they don't know what they don't know sometimes. So they may not even recognize that their care was, not the standard that they should have received. And so I feel like, the assumption is AI is always right, but it's not always right. And we should challenge it. I remember I was planning, it was like Black History Month, and I wanted to identify in every specialty, medicine, immunology, it was around the 1619 anniversary, what did slaves bring to immunology and such? And so I asked AI, what did they bring? And the stereotypical, it didn't have anything related to healthcare. It talked about dancing and music, all of the tropes that are associated with people of color and Black people in particular. I pushed back and I said, no, immunology, vaccines came from an African tribal tradition. What else can you suggest? It could not respond. It just gave me the same thing. So even when I gave examples, and so that required me to actually have outside knowledge to push back to help AI grow and understand. And so one of my concerns is it is being used to, you put in the race, the gender, the age of the person, and it's going to generate a report or a response, and, we talked about, cheating. It's almost like the bigotry of low expectations. When you have stellar students who may not fit a profile what a stellar student comes from in their background, is AI always going to be considered as like, did they use AI for that? And then the last thing is, we have to learn implicit bias in healthcare. How do there are all these tools that supposedly for bias. Number one, how do you know that they're working right? Should not there be a kind of disclaimer and say a bias tool is used to verify X? So like even the systems that are AI, associated that check bias have bias.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this whole system needs to have a 360 query as we move forward because it is being used whether we want to or not. And we don't even know sometimes that it has created a bias output to challenge it. And in doing so, we're accepting the output as if it's the standard. And that is the last thing I want to say. Nuance is not always a thing in AI, which is important,
Right.
So.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for sharing that. I also would encourage, as we continue to say time and time again, yes, AI is a great tool. AI will replace some jobs, but at the end of the day, people still need to manage AI. AI is not going to win out. There's a new documentary coming out on Friday, March 27th. I think it's called the AI Doc, and I encourage people to watch it because I think we have to also consider how we're shaping narratives and how we're framing this conversation around AI. And so that's just my plug, not, necessarily for that documentary, but this whole landscape as we look at politics, people are always concerned about misinformation and disinformation. In this space too, we need to be very concerned about misinformation and disinformation. And also some of that is fueled by bias, right? That's where I'm coming around to. So looking at building pipelines and expanding access, I want to go to Venetia. And you made a career switch. You went from one career to the next, and you're also kind of straddling both, using your expertise in one to fuel the other. What organizations or opportunities made the biggest difference in your own pathway into tech?
Thank you for asking that question. And yes, I have. I'm straddling the fence, I'd like to say, because even though I officially shifted in my mind and in my heart and soul, I have not moved a muscle because it lives within my heart. So the organization that is responsible for this shift is AI Innovision, founded by the Little sisters, Alicia and Lorette Little. And I never set out initially to be a consultant. All I wanted to do, first of all, I was a part of a community that was, she was brought on to do a workshop, and I was just there to get the information. And then I'm like, I could use this to create content for my CMOS business, because I started that CMOS business from stop working in nursing, taking care of my mom, ran out of money and needed something else to do. And the tools that I used to help her to get over the illness that was inflicted upon her, it had such great results. I used that to start the CMOS business. And I was, in that time, I was paying someone to create content for me in that business. And when I heard her speak, I'm like, oh, but I could create my own content and put that money into the business to do other things in the business. But then the more she spoke, the more she was speaking to me in the things that I had way, way in the distant dream. One was being a speaker for young people, and being more importantly, a motivational speaker, because I find that in and around my surroundings, the young people, in my opinion, are not having the guidance that they need. You know what I mean? And I see that as a parent myself, that it is part of my job to ensure that I instill some of these disciplines and guidance to these young people. So as she went on, it'd be like, oh, wait a minute now, something is running here. And so I got more and more into it. And then I saw all the possibilities that was available to me in being an AI consultant, all the different level of things that I thought was way out for me then became possible, not just a distant dream. And I realized also that it provides all the opportunity for me to really go back to my seniors that I had walked away from because of my mom. And it gave me that gateway to say, yes, I can still serve them while serving myself in this capacity. Because what I find with my mom and the elderly population is that I take you, for instance, if you're giving my mom a gift, don't buy her flowers, don't give her money and stuff like that. Those things doesn't matter to her. Sentimental things makes a difference and means something to her. Those are things that she cherishes. And one of the things that I'm creating is using my capacity as an AI consultant to do senior workshops, so we can create memoirs with them. We can help them to write stories of their lives, and henceforth I can also help them create storybooks, because puzzle books, coloring books that will help their mental capacity in doing activities in there, whether it be the senior center where they are, and all those things I can see, because these are the things that appeal to my mom.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it lights her up when you get her to talking. And these are things that can be captured with the assistance of AI. And I say assistance because I want everyone to understand that AI is not and should not be a standalone product.
Right.
AI should be the assistance of us, the human being, because I did a presentation that AI plus HR was the human intelligence of this all. You know what I mean? And Dr. Barry alluded to it. We need to keep these AI technology in check. We need to challenge them to make sure we're getting the correct information from them that we need and desire to be able to do whatever it is that we are desiring to do.
Okay, well, thank you, Benicia. I'm going to move on to our next thing. I did want to do a shout out again for the organization that you mentioned, AI Innovations, the Little Sisters. And if you want to put their information in the chat, we can share it with the folks who've registered for the webinar so they can have that as a resource. I also want to give a shout out to small businesses and small business owners, because, it sounds like you have, you're having these multiple streams of income through these multiple businesses, which AI can help support, right? Like, we do have a Senate bill I believe it was 417, that really is asking the Department of Economic Development to start a task force or a work group of sorts to help support small business owners so that they can use AI more effectively in their business so they can compete with larger organizations. So I think that's important. The other thing that I would say here is that we did invite the Women's Business Development Council to attend, but they were far stretched with other things. But I do want to give a shout out to the work that they are doing to support small businesses or small, women-owned small businesses, especially in the AI space. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our next question for Megan. And, there are a lot of different programs out there, with good intentions and but that don't achieve equitable outcomes. And certainly this AI innovations program that she was talking about, that Venetia was talking about, was in community, right? Had an audience and was trying to bring some equity to the space. And Venetia is an outcome of that work. But from your respective expertise, right, in policy research, what are the warning signs that an AI education program or program, business program or career program might inadvertently perpetuate rather than address disparities? Because we see that happen, right? Good intentions sometimes don't give the good outcomes that we need. So what do you say about that? What are the warning
Absolutely.
signs?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I'll offer a few that I've been noticing. First, I think when we talk about the need to think about the lack of human narratives when we're talking about the outputs, and we mentioned this on Monday at our panel, but the AI models generating things that are available from public data sets, but not really, especially in the AAPI community, as I've seen it at the state level and in my capacity teaching. A lot of the K through 12 AAPI curriculum that's being rolled out is predicated on oral history projects because there's a lot of immigration stories that, to Dr. Barry's point, I believe, just aren't available, kind of the granular history. And so it removes, when we just look at in isolation, those outputs of data sets and numbers, which is very important, but we don't have that human component. I would say that's a warning sign of this over reliance to use that to bolster our own understanding of our own histories. And so how that can add context not only to the humanities, but also in that broader level of critical inquiry and critical thinking. And that kind of brings me into my next point about a warning sign being students not being able to discern for themselves and their own agency what AI is giving them versus what they're thinking through. It offers a different perspective. Sometimes it offers over validation or over affirmation and removes that lens and that need for critical inquiry and discernment, which I would say the lack of that would be a warning sign. And I think the last one I would offer in a more broader field is the need to think about the larger components. We talked about it on Monday as this ecosystem, but what are the larger components that function as variables in the equation of equitable access, and what does it look like? In education, questioning what does this look like across districts if we're using models that rely on high-speed internet, high-end devices, if they require elevated broadband access, will this disadvantage schools in under-resourced or rural areas? In our pre-panel discussion, Dr. Berry shared a great article on digital divide exacerbating class divisions. And I think this stratification could really begin here if we're not careful, as a warning sign that we're not distributing equitable access. And AI is something that should be equally distributed and equally met by students with these different backgrounds so that we don't fall into these warning signs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And so let's move into looking at some community-led solutions and things like that. And I want to go to Versha. What does community-driven actually look like in practice when we're talking about access to AI education and training and career opportunities? And how do we move from, beyond consultation, like being advisors, to genuine community leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I'm a proud graduate of PLTI, which, really is a foundation for community leadership. And so there's no substitute for that, right? For like deep, intensive, and like long running kinds of trainings and things like that, and building expertise. But what AI can't replace for us or provide to us is really listening, and what we call wisdom collection. And so a lot of our work we spend with students, teachers, community members, and ask them, how are you using AI right now? For students, we've had the most fascinating conversations around how they have really learned. We think of students as like, oh, they just feed their assignments into ChatGPT, but actually they're using, various AI tools to help them learn in the way that they know is best for them. So they will do things like we've had students say, I was reading Hamlet last year. I really struggle with the Shakespearean language. So it helped me summarize in a way that I wasn't getting in class. We have students say, I asked, AI to create a summary for me in the style of Gossip Girl because I really like Gossip Girl and is able to explain to me, this period of history that was confusing in a way that I could understand. Students really want their teachers to know all these innovative ways that they're using AI. But when they're hearing from their schools and from their teachers is absolutely no AI, AI is always cheating, there's no space for them to share that, right? There's some new research that came out from the Pew Research Center showing that Black and Hispanic students are using AI to complete schoolwork and also for emotional support much more than white students are. And I have no idea why that is, right? But I know, and probably no one knows why that is, right? The way we would find out why that is and the way that we would learn more is by talking to students and by gathering qualitative data. And the other thing that AI really allows us to do is take large amounts of qualitative data and analyze it very quickly. And so oftentimes when we do surveys in schools and other places in the community, we limit ourselves to quantitative questions, multiple choice questions, because those are easy to analyze. But no more. Now we can ask open-ended questions. We can have focus groups. We can really gather a lot of wisdom and not be limited by it just sitting somewhere. We can identify trends, we can pull out keywords, we can create, a vision for a district or for a community organization for how we're going to address these things. So we can use AI tools to also engage the community and learn more about their experiences. But we're at a real generational difference with how folks are using AI right now. And those of us who are, Gen Xers, like we really need to listen to young people and hear, what they're doing with AI, because a lot of the assumptions we're making are actually inaccurate. One of which is like actually young people, middle school, high school, they're pretty skeptical of AI. They're pretty cynical. They don't really want their teachers using it. They think their teachers are cheating, right? So like a lot of the things that we assume, oh, they're just, they're the ones adopting all of this. They want to just use it to take all their thinking, isn't necessarily true, but we'll only know that if we listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to get a minute into cultural responsive AI stuff in a minute. I'm just preparing y'all. But as we hear what Versha had to share on this, what is community driven look and all these, these things, I wonder, what kinds of partnerships should we consider or need to happen between community organizations and higher ed and corporations and employers that will create like real access to technology and real pathways into tech careers for people of color. And so anyone can chime in on this one. I would love to hear from you if there are definitive things that need to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I also want to take it a step further and say I don't think it's just enough to get women and people of color in tech careers. I think what we're lacking is people in leadership in those spaces. For example, I know Megan mentioned earlier, there's a lot of Asian Americans in the computer science space already. But what we're not seeing is Asian Americans in leadership. And the same thing happens with um, like all communities of color. Leadership is still very white led, and leadership is often the people who are crafting the vision. So it's important that we are represented in that leadership space.
Okay.
I'd
Anyone
also
else?
like to say a partnership that actually works. Shares one thing, community and organizations are at the table from day one, and they're not there as recipients, but as co-designers. In the work that I'm initiating across libraries, workforce programs, community centers, faith-based services, the most effective model involves a single exchange. Institution brings the resource and the credentials, but the community brings the context and the trust. Neither works without the other. And I'd like to also push us to think about the healthcare settings, assisted livings, nursing homes, and all these other places have a workforce of CNAs, care workers, kitchen staff, and all that. That's predominantly of women of colors, right? Who interact with AI-assisted tools every day. They need to be upskilled. That workforce needs to be taught. And it is in the pipeline of the strategy of everything, because if they don't understand these tools, how will they be able to effectively serve in a oncoming workforce of tomorrow? Not even tomorrow, it is already here. So it is not even of tomorrow. So these need to be taught so that they are better able to understand and work effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so so in the training of some of these other careers that are non-AI, people need to be trained on using AI tools, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Dr. Berry, I saw you had your hand up.
I think, this is in relation to the article Megan had mentioned. We all need to become fluent in AI. To have, we got away with it with new, like the iPhone and all that, but we can't be like the old fogies and our kids know more than we do. That cannot work in the way we're going, because we're going to have a multi-tiered system in terms of the haves and have-nots, in terms of AI understanding. But also to amplify, I've been in rooms where the AI subject comes up and they're like, you don't know how to code. You're not an engineer. As if you don't have something substantial to contribute to the conversation, in the fact that AI is going to be running almost every aspect of my life. And I think that having, people who identify as marginalized don't get into those rooms, and they have something to say and something to offer. And I think we need to create opportunities in these communities so that they can learn AI. If they're in a profession that will be phased out, well, what's the pathway to take that skill set and transform it into the AI new environment? We are not doing that. So when I look at education, I'm not just looking at students who are still in school. I'm looking at it as a trajectory so that adults can understand and have opportunities in this new environment as well.
Thank you. And so shifting, to a policy focus, I appreciate that. You know, there's a few pieces of legislation, at least four, as in the Senate Bills 4, 5, 86, and 417, where our legislature, our policymakers are trying to make some changes along online privacy and chatbot protections, and also some pieces of AI education. But for a panel, whoever wants to jump in on this one, if you could advocate for specific policy changes at the state level that would most effectively address AI education equity, what would they be and why? Anybody?
I can take one. See,
Okay.
we got to first the mandate that any publicly funded AI program meets a cultural competence standard, not just a checkbox, because most times that's what happens. They're just going to say, hey, we've done this, but it is not represented across the cultural divide. And we want to make sure that that happens, because most of what takes place in policies affects us as colors and women predominantly. And in so, we need to have a say and be represented.
All right. Anyone else? And so, yes, Dr. Berry, there's your hand.
So I am of two minds. I teach about, we've moved away from cultural competence to cultural humility, because how are you truly competent? And I know I'm not competent in my parents' culture, right? But that's broad swaths. What does that mean when you're actually, gold star competent, and what's responsiveness looks like? Again, it's reflective of how the data is acquired. What the input is what's going to be the output. And so how do we query that? How do we know that it is, something that will maintain over time? And so I'm a cynic from Brooklyn. And so I'm always thinking about, well, as AI is developing, because although we teach implicit bias in the medical care system with the hope that it would mean that we won't unintentionally exhibit bias in the care of our patients, we still have health disparities, right? Because it's unconscious. And so I even that I think is a whole area of study. What is cultural responsiveness and humility in AI? I think that's an opportunity, actually. That's a new job for somebody out there. to consider.
I like it. I like it as a new job for someone to consider. I hope our legislators are listening to us now. And so I want to just, tiptoe through this a little bit more. And so, yes, cultural competency is an old term, right? It's really about cultural humility in AI worlds. And they're starting to talk about culturally responsive AI, which means building systems that recognize, respect, and actively center the cultural identities, values, languages, histories, and underlying power dynamics of the people they affect, right? In practice, it includes changes to process and people and data and design and governance and evaluation and deployment, all the things, all the things. And so when we're looking at this, I want to, you know, share some examples of what this looks like in, educational and workforce settings. I'll share a few to kind of get us going so people know what's happening in Connecticut already. And if there are other things that panelists want to share, I want to open it up, right? So the State Department of Education, our Connecticut State Department of Education has AI. They started an AI in K through 12 schools. There was a pilot that went from January through June 2025. It was a state-run pilot across 7 districts, and plus a model K through 12 digital citizenship curriculum that included digital ethics and AI use in classrooms. And also had these components of cultural responsive AI in AI, in their education and teacher training, right? So that was something. Yale Center for Environmental Justice was doing environmental justice plus AI work with Connecticut community partners, right? Some local folks, and they've built toolkits and partner with local communities to apply AI-informed methods of environmental justice issues, which we know, especially in Connecticut, affects a lot of our communities of color and our lower income communities. And then UConn is working on some stuff around neurovariability. They have an initiative that they're doing. That is looking on responsibly implementing AI tools to support cognitive diversity and inclusive pedagogy. So some of those things are going on. There's the Connecticut AI Alliance that was formed to coordinate academia and industry and government on responsible AI development and workforce ecosystem building. And again, they had these equity-minded programs in there as they build out workforce pipelines. And then CBIA, which is the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, has a statewide AI workforce training expansion. Their program is to add applied AI skills to higher ed courses and industry pipelines. And again, right, looking at accessibility, right? Not necessarily some of the things we're talking about, but more accessibility focused curricula. So there's stuff that's happening. There are some local DEIJ hubs at UConn and Yale who are doing some of this work behind the scenes. And so we hear a lot about some of these things. I wonder if there are examples that our panelists have to share on what this really looks like in practice when we're talking about cultural humility or cultural responsive AI. Do I have any takers? Or do we like, yay, state, let's keep going?
Well,
yes,
I added a couple of things to kind of my wish list from the state. So, I mean, one is when we look at educator preparation programs, right, and certification. So it's great to have like these AI literacy goals and the pilot and all of that. And just like with financial literacy, I'm like, who's teaching that, right? And how do teachers, how do we don't just have a set of teachers who know how to do this. And there's a real fear amongst teachers that they will be replaced by AI. And many of us are like, that's ridiculous. Like, of course, how could you ever replace a teacher, right? But there is a fear, and there is, that is one of the many reasons why some teachers are hesitant to dip their toe into AI, right? So that is a really important group that we really need to think about, like, how are we upskilling teachers so that not only can they use AI for their own jobs to actually make teaching more sustainable and kind of take out some of those tedious tasks that really take their time away from students, but also how do they build up their own AI literacy so that our students aren't being held back by the lack of teacher preparation in those areas. That's certainly something that policy could address. It's certainly something that our universities could address. But I think that what we're seeing right now is that those ed prep programs are pretty behind where all this other work is. In terms of cultural responsiveness, or cultural humility as well, thinking about how do we use AI to kind of make up for the lack of culturally responsive curriculum that we have in many of our schools. So for example, one project that we do with students is that we have them write, about their futures. We have as elementary school students write as detailed as you can, a narrative of what do you want to do when you grow up? Do you want to go to college, university, trade school? Write it all. We use AI platforms that have privacy agreements with schools. We put in an image of a student with what they want to do when they grow up, and we create an image for them of like, this is you as a surgeon, this is you as a vet, this is you, in your future self. And literally they're seeing themselves aged in that profession. And that may seem like a small thing, but if you've never seen anyone doing that thing that you aspire to do, if you've never, period, seen anyone doing it or anyone that looks like you, that can be very powerful. And it's not going to show up maybe in the books in your classroom or the curriculum that your district has purchased. So be using AI for creative ways so that kids can literally see themselves.
Yeah, thank you. I love it. I want to do that for me too. I'm not quite full grown up yet. I want to put myself in there and see where I am in 20 years. I love that idea. It's almost like when we're talking about Portrait of a Graduate, right? But this is really like a full realization and envisioning of a future. I love it. Megan.
Yeah, I just want to add to this that I've also seen culture responsive AI being used to bolster things that the legislature has already deemed as important. And so a few years ago, we had a win in the multilingual learner space with the Multilingual Learner Bill of Rights. And with that comes a translation of parent-teacher conferences, the incorporation of ESL, English as a Second Language, and limited English proficient parent engagement in student academic experience. And a few years ago, the conversation around language access looked very different, even though it was not that long ago, just because the advancements in AI with translation makes that a lot more feasible when we're looking at how do we get translators in? How do we know that we're reaching the diverse needs of languages spoken at the home for our students? And so culture responsive AI through things like language access can exist in and of itself. And so that can be used to affirm and bolster priorities that have already been passed by the legislature in educational and also in workforce training settings. We had conversations around first responders showing up to scenes where the person at the scene was not English as a first language. And so how are we engaging and literally using this technology to bridge these divides in asset-based ways? And so that can also be culturally responsive use of artificial intelligence in and of itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, real quick.
Okay, real quick. In terms of communication, in our university, we just our student government, we just started Merit, which specifically focuses on students who have English as a second language, particularly in terms of communication. So sometimes they might, because English is a second language, they might not be able to write as friendly as an email, and it could come off unprofessional. So I think there's room for AI to help with communication and especially written communication, especially in terms of these groups of students. So I think that's a potential direction.
I like it. Thank you. So I want to leave time for us to get to some Q&A. We do have a good number of those coming in. But, for our panelists, we always like to have an action step for our participants. And so if we're getting practical about all of this, I mean, we've shared some good information and wisdom and concerns and questions, and I think folks are curious, but if each of you, please share one specific action. So one specific action that attendees can take in the next 30 days to advance AI equity in their own communities or organizations. So what is that one thing, one specific action that attendees can take? I'm going to go to Venicia first, and then we'll go to Megan.
One specific action that communities can take right now is what it would look like. It perhaps might not be it can be in the next 30 days, is if I go to the library and I ask a question, do you offer AI classes here? That answer should be yes. If not, what are we doing about it? Because it's not about who is credentialed in AI, is everyone needs access so that they can be familiar with what it is. So they don't have to fear and they don't have to say, oh, this is a monster that's coming to take control or to get us out of here. No, when you know what you're getting into, when you understand what you're doing, then you have a different outlook as to what it is and how we move forward as a society and have it be an incorporated thing as opposed to an anomaly that is out of reach for the majority. Because at the crux of it all, AI affects each and every single one of us. And as such, we should be able to address it and interact with it as such. It might not be to an expert level, but still.
Yes, have access, right? So ask the question, go into the library, are there AI classes available? And if they're not, what are we going to do about it? All right, I like it.
Doing about it.
Yes, Megan.
Yeah, I think my answer revolves around engagement in different ways. We at the Commission really elevate civic engagement. And as AI starts to impact a lot of facets of civic life, looking at your engagement with AI, we talked about earlier in the week that even 10 minutes of engagement is engagement. But while the state is ruminating and the legislature is ruminating on these plans, right? AI is already here. It's been here. And so what does your engagement look like? Similar to Venetia, what are the steps that you're taking to look at what engagement looks like for you and where these blind spots kind of are as we're in the development stages of these plans to become civically engaged in talking to your legislators, talking to your representatives about inclusions and considerations as you see it from your lived experience that we should be mirroring and implementing at the state level. So engagement on all those different sectors.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Haritha and then Bersha.
Sounds good. I would say, for especially to educators and policymakers, explore all the AI models out there. I find myself a little bit guilty only using ChatGPT, but there's more than that. And I feel like if you are exploring all the options, you are aware of what AI can do, and that can help you make better policy, whether that's in government or whether it's for your classroom to make your learning better for students.
Thank you.
I would say if you have 30 days, in those 30 days, talk every single person that you talk to, ask them how they're using AI right now and how they want to use AI, because we cannot bring in new initiatives and solutions if they're not aligned with what our community really is looking for. And I think that, I have a sociology background. I would say like that you can learn really by engaging with your community members that way, especially if you're talking to a broad spectrum of ages, demographic, every kind of demographic, starting from really young kids to the elderly, and everyone has a way that they're either using or want to use AI right now.
Thank you. And Linda.
Mine is a two.
Action. Okay.
It's two-part because I want there to be a digital bill of rights. I want that everyone has access to Wi-Fi, no matter where you are. It's free, and there shouldn't be different lanes so that I can't watch a video to teach me something. I have to pay extra. That's my thing. We have to have the foundation, which is accessible truly for everyone. But then the other thing is, I think, kind of just to amplify what Versha was saying, I want everyone to. I don't want to presume. I want everyone to learn AI. I know people are hesitant and they feel like it's just like a vacuum clean sucking up our data. But if we are not part of that database, it will perpetuate bias. Just like in medicine, we don't have enough of underrepresented groups who participate in research and clinical trials. Well, then when you have a new medication, it's not going to include you. And that group ends up being disproportionately adversely affected. And so I don't want there to be the class divide to further widen because we as a society have people who are afraid and do not use AI. Let's use it. And while you're using it, don't be afraid to challenge it and do a risk benefit analysis because your unique perspective in life can identify opportunities to make it better.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So what I have from you all are, from Venetia starting us with ask the questions about access, right? Walk into the places and see if it's easily accessible for people to start learning. Megan said engagement, right? Engage with it and engage with others around conversations about AI. Explore all the models, Haritha says, all the AI models so that you can learn what they are and what they're doing and their effect. And then Versha said, ask every person how they're using AI, right? So really start some curiosity in some spaces. People are like, what are you talking about? Why should I be using it? But start asking people about it. And then Linda closes off with, we need a digital bill of rights, right? That everyone should have access to to the internet, first of all, and then also to start learning. There are free courses everywhere where you can just find, Megan alluded to this a little bit, right? Like 5-10 minutes a day on just playing with AI and learning what it can do. Let it do your grocery list or do a recipe for you. Like start small, but we should all start learning around AI. I'm going to invite Yukio Ida back into the space and help us navigate our Q&A while we still have time to do some of that. So what are some of the questions that are coming through in our Q&A that we can address in the
Sure.
next 10 minutes?
Sure. So there's a question about there's been discussions around cheating using AI, but when entry-level jobs are the first ones being automated, aren't we essentially debating homework policies on a sinking ship?
Okay.
So what's the plan? Thank you, Raphael. What's the actual plan to prepare young people for an economy? And they might not have a place, right? They might not have that entry point that we have traditionally like built our educational system on. So
Right.
any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think there is a plan. I think these bills that are being proposed are the beginning of plans to ensure that AI education is happening in K through 12 spaces. Also, our Office of Workforce Development and Workforce Strategy has been working with organizations like CBIA to start looking at workforce pipelines. The Lieutenant Governor has been doing work around STEAM with girls, and also through the governor's workforce council on whatever, girls and women. And so I'm sorry, I'm part of that, but I'm trying to get all the words out. And so everyone has an idea of what kind to needs to happen. Like we know that within the next 3 years, 30% of work hours are going to go to AI, right? And so what happens to people in those entry level positions? They're going to have to start upskilling and reskilling. Our state government knows. And so that's, I think, what can happen on our parts as residents of this state is that we need to be reaching out to our legislators. We need to be reaching out to our local board of educations and say, hey, did you know that you were going to lose jobs to AI? What are you doing to help educate our children? On a state level, reach out to your legislator. This issue is important to me. And at the same time, right, the government is doing their pieces to work on workforce development, workforce pipeline. The State Department of Education is working on AI. So I think that this is moving more than people really realize, but it's because people aren't fully engaged in some of those spaces, those civic spaces to know. I do think there's work to be done across all sectors, including healthcare and other fields. But I think no one is sitting under the covers, with the covers pulled up and not thinking that we're not going to lose jobs. I think there's some movement on that. Okay, what else do we have?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of this has already been answered through the discussions, but Joe was asking about, what it's less about controlling the tool and more about strengthening the user through that self-awareness, creativity, and authentic human thinking. And, what are people's thoughts around the need to design educational programs for communities of color that prioritize those human capacities alongside the technical skills?
Yeah,
All
I
right.
I, I think you're right.
Yeah.
The final encouragement I would encourage are the folks who are with us in the space on the webinar, as well as those who will watch later, is that, it's really about, yes, policymakers doing their part, but also it's about each of us doing ours, right? And, sometimes we just sit and watch things happen. And so how can we get up out of a space of watching things happen or letting things happen to us and taking action? And so I think our panel provided some good action steps that people can take over the next 30 days, right, to start to do something. Some people are further advanced, right? Some people are like, oh, I'm running an AI company myself, or, I'm helping my kid use AI tools. That's great. What's the next step? How do you continue to advance and move forward? And then also encouraging you to reach out to your state legislators, right? You have a state senator and also a state representative who represents you and your values and the things that you need for you, your family, and your community. Reach out to them. That's another action you can take. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our esteemed panel. Thank you so much for your good insights and for this conversation, this spirited conversation. There's so much that we did leave on the table. We still have there's still a basket full of cornucopia of information that we could share. There might be yet another conversation. I mean, we've hosted 3 of these. Stay tuned. There might be a 4th or a 5th or a 6th in the next month or so. Don't be surprised if you see it out there, but we love for you to join us. Also, if you registered for this webinar, which most of you did, you will receive all the materials. You'll receive the previous recordings, as well as any other collateral information that we have to share with you. And please stay tuned and stay connected to the commission. We are on LinkedIn and on Facebook and also on Instagram. So thank you very much. And YouTube, don't forget our YouTube channel. Thanks so much and have a great day. Be well and be good digital citizens.